When people are leaving the church and they're upset about their family, I'm like, congratulations, you are a growth opportunity for your family.
That's awesome.
Your job is to, try to do that as compassionately as possible. And you're right, sometimes when you're in it, there is no other room for anything other than courage.
Welcome to Faith After Faith. I'm Katie Langston. What happens to family relationships when someone's faith changes? What's really going on beneath the fights about church attendance and Christmas dinner? Today, I want to introduce you to someone who has not only lived this, but has studied it. Lindsay Hansen Park is the executive director of Sunstone, a nonprofit that hosts open forums about Mormon thought and experience. She's consulted on Under the Banner of Heaven and American Primeval. I like to call her Hollywood's Mormon whisperer. She's a historian of Mormon polygamy with a book coming out this year on Juanita Brooks. And she's been a friend of mine since we were both Mormon feminist bloggers in the early 2010s, which was a wilder time than it sounds like. I started by asking Lindsay about her own faith background.
For me, I grew up in a pretty typical Wasatch Front, Utah-based Mormon ward. I always say that Mormonism preserves the village. That a lot of, society, modernity has sort of interrupted. And so I had a village. It was my Mormon ward, which is our congregation. And everybody I knew fit inside of that. I mean, my grandparents, both my maternal and paternal grandparents, were in the neighborhood across the street from mine. And so it just felt very insular and safe. And I loved it. I was one of the people that it worked really well for a while. I mean, I was a white kid, which helped with Mormon doctrine. And, I was a girl that fit inside the sort of norms of what a respectable Mormon girl is supposed to be. And so I had a pretty decent experience. And now, I'm sad to realize that other people who I loved and grew up with did not have the same experience. But for me, it was pretty good. I ended up marrying into a very conservative rural family up in Idaho. That was my first confrontation with a Mormonism that was, I would say, more fundamentalist, more rigid than my own. And when I say fundamentalist, people are like, oh, did you marry into polygamy? No, it was just, I always call it LDS extra. Like these are like, people that come from farming rural communities who still believe the old frontier doctrine and like to them, the doctrine is still very much tied to the old ways. So I remember being in conflict with it constantly, questions of things that sound absurd, like can Black people and white people be married, right? And
Right?
Me,
Yes.
The way that I grew up was, I guess, more modern than others. I thought that they could, but this culture didn't believe that they could. So it was always stuff like that. And when I, as a woman, would try to defend a position or an opinion or say, I think that's wrong or I think that's racist, it was always sort of shouted down. Well, here's what the prophet said. Here's this quote from this prophet. And what can you do when you're trumped by the priesthood in Mormonism, right? Like it's the final say, especially from a prophet's voice. So that was a really challenging experience. I tried to do the trad wife thing, you would say. And it was very lonely and isolating. I had been taught my whole life to want that, I was sort of groomed into that life. So it's not that I couldn't do it. I had young kids, very young. I was a homemaker. I could cook and clean for the house. Cleaning, not as good. Cooking, a little bit better.
Cleaning sucks, cooking's fun.
But I mean, that was the scope of my world, and my worth was attached to that. So if my house was dirty, then there was something wrong with me. If, luckily, and this is such a silly thing, but the ways in which I got power at that time was being a good cook, performing domesticity in certain ways that, and you're kind of always in competition with the other women around you to show that like, this is how you're worth something. And there's a lot of scarcity. And so, I started having questions about some of those old frontier ways. One of them being polygamy. The polygamy was a joke sort of in the world that I lived in. It was like a threatening joke, right? Like someday in heaven, you're going to have to live it. Behave now, because someday you're going to have to be competing with other wives. Be a good wife now because there's other women.
Right.
So it's
Well,
like
we used to joke like, oh, I'd love a sister wife to help around the house, or I'd love a sister wife to take my husband, for a couple of nights so I don't have to be bothered by it or
yeah, it was
whatever,
always like someone always had to be denigrated in that conversation, right? It was either like, oh, let's get rid of the stuffy old stupid husband, or the wife has to be good enough to compete. And it just never made me feel good. And I remember, because it just felt so fundamentally unfair, realizing that and talking to women and the pain that it caused, and realizing that women were capable of having feelings for more than one man, yet we were supposed to shove that down, but men didn't really have to do that. And that didn't make any sense to me. And so, I started to try to talk to other people about it in my community, my family, my friends, and like there was just no talking about it. We didn't talk about it. It made everybody uncomfortable. And so, of course, that's where I find, the discussions online on the internet. And back then, the internet was still very forbidden, getting on this kind of stuff. And that's where, of course, you and I meet. We find each other through Feminist Mormon Housewives, and we start blogging. And that's where that linear faith slope really starts to
it
all
went
over the
off the
place.
course. Exactly.
Yeah, thank goodness. Like, what a joy that is to have your faith disrupted like that, even though it's so painful.
It does suck, but there can be really beautiful things that come out of it. So Lindsay's work as a historian led her into the world of Mormon fundamentalism. These are groups that practice polygamy and hold to early 19th century doctrines that the mainstream LDS Church has moved away from. And what she found is that the line between mainstream and fundamentalist can be a bit blurrier than most Mormons want to admit.
And so I married a country boy and then, thought that it would be like a country music song or something. I don't know what I thought, but it's a hard life. There's a lot of poverty, but in other ways, I'm so grateful for that experience because I did learn some really interesting stuff. I learned how to cook really well and to garden really well and to grind my own wheat and do all of that kind of stuff that I had been exposed to. So I'm grateful for it now because it helped me understand Mormon fundamentalism, which of course is where my career ended up exploring those edges. I think I went to the edges of that to understand my own experience because, the family I had married into, it was very blurry that way. Like there's not a lot of difference between rural Idaho mainstream LDS people, in my experience, and people from fundamentalist groups. It's a rural cultural mindset that's influenced by Mormonism, and it's very, very similar. And so I didn't realize, like, I thought we were mainstream. We went to church, married in a temple, did all the things, but it's holding to ideas that I think modern LDS people that live in cities or live outside of Utah or are academics aren't exposed to. And so when you and I were blogging together, I often felt very defensive and upset because academics that we knew and scholars that we knew would say, that's not Mormonism. What you're describing isn't Mormonism. And I'm like, it is for me.
Like that's what I grew up
Very much
with.
is.
Yeah.
So yeah. And since I've done my work, of course I start a podcast exploring the history of Mormon polygamy, and that brings me into contact with real polygamists and extremists that are like way more extreme than anything I'd been exposed to. It also introduced me to so many women like me that mainstream LDS people can be LDS extra. That's it. That's a thing. We have this like mom talk, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, where these women are like, do whatever you want. And you can live Mormonism the way you want, which is a message that I endorse, by the way. But it's such a foreign experience to what I
totally. I can't relate to it at all. Right? Like the first time I drank a cup of coffee was like a religious revelation. I was like, what? I'm free to drink coffee. Like I cannot relate to like, yeah, it's fine to like soft swing.
Man, it took me 7 years, no kidding, to learn how to wear a tank top properly.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
I was layering like 3 tank tops at a time, and somehow that was better.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit of a word about fundamentalism writ large versus Mormon fundamentalism. Fundamentalism in the broader culture, interpreting, a lot of times it has to do with the way of interpreting scripture, having a sort of ultra super literalistic worldview. And I think that is encompassed in Mormon fundamentalism. But when we say Mormon fundamentalism, it often means, like you were saying, specifically polygamy. So I would say fundamentalist attitudes in the broader sense are pretty mainstream, I think, in Mormon culture, at least the way I grew up, not the mom talks of the world, but the way I grew up, and maybe just tease that out a little bit.
Yeah, the literalism is a huge part. It's this idea of restoring the original roots of something, right? So fundamentalism is trying to restore the Mormon restoration, believing that Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, restored the true gospel from Jesus, and then it's sort of been lost by the mainstream, by the mom talks of the world. It needs to be restored, right? And it's, you know, Christian fundamentalism is very similar, going back to biblical roots. Mormon fundamentalism is very similar. It's this idea of Joseph Smith's polygamy, blood atonement, all of these frontier doctrines that have been lost in modernity now need to be restored. And a lot of Mormon fundamentalists are polygamists, but not all of them are.
Right.
They sort of pick and choose which fundamentals they want to restore.
What are some of the family resemblances you see throughout all of Mormon culture, fundamentalist, more mainstream LDS?
Yeah, growing up mainstream LDS, we spent a lot of time trying to distance ourselves from polygamists. I mean, you can see it in the name branding that the modern church is doing now. We're not using the term Mormon. We don't want to have anything to do with that. And that's because they are so similar, right? And so it's hard to find those distinctions. Like I said, once I sort of got into the gray of the messy middle, you're like, oh, there really is not a distinction. It's just like a gradient, you know?
Yep.
And in fundamentalism, especially, one of the best things when you talk to people that come from those communities or their large families, that all their cousins are like, you have a built-in play group. So even if you're weird, even if you're strange, you belong. And that's really potent. That's really powerful. So Mormon families are I would say in fundamentalism and mainstream are almost identical.
So I asked Lindsay about what actually keeps these systems running. Like, what's the engine underneath the family dynamics, the conformity pressure, the fear of someone leaving? Her answer was immediate. Shame.
Yeah, I don't think that shame is incidental to high demand religions. I think it's load bearing. I think it's part of the architecture. You absolutely need it as a mechanism of control. And if you'll permit me, like a side quest for a minute, I produced this Jody Hildebrandt series for Netflix, or a documentary called Evil Influencer. And so when we delved into this story, this is a story about a female therapist. She was a therapist for a time. Gets all this power, and then she, uses it to harm the LDS community writ large, and she's done a tremendous amount of damages to families. And she's such an anomaly because she's a woman in a highly patriarchal culture who was able to get so much power and wealth and career. She became like this weird cult prophet in her own right, but she's female. And how she did it is by exploiting the shame of men, their sexual shame, which is so baked in and so exploitable in Mormon culture. And what she would do is she had an MO. She would go find wealthy couples, become friends with the wives, start questioning the man's porn use, find an end for his sexual shame, separate the couple, and then find ways to take his money and all kinds of, it's just crazy stuff, right? So we were doing a story about that. And I think that's really when it hit home, just how functional shame is in Mormonism. It's dependent on it. I used to think that, maybe our doctrines and our purity culture sort of evolved out of good intentions. I don't know where I thought that, but I always assumed that it was just a natural thing of humans to be that way. But I really do think it's structurally important to Mormon control. I have seen some of Mormonism's most powerful, rich, wealthy men be completely controlled by the LDS Church through shame. The church might not be able to control them in business. They might not be able to control them in other choices. But because the church has access to their sexual history, they can control them. And I think there's a reason why we focus so much on men's teachings and men's doctrine on pornography, because it's a way to control men. It's co-opting a natural impulse, something that's ubiquitous, and porn is very easy to get to. Most men look at it. And so creating a moral standard that, by the way, all of them are engaging in. The church leaders who are punishing men for looking at it are also engaging in it. And that's how it functions.
Right.
It's kind of like this is crude and probably not as nuanced as I'd like it to be, but it's like a internal blackmail system, right? Mm-hmm. You can keep people in line if you've got that.
I should explain one thing here. In the LDS Church, every couple of years, you sit down with your bishop, who is a lay leader, your neighbor, maybe your dentist, and have to answer a series of questions about your beliefs, about your sexual behavior, your tithing, your coffee consumption. Now, answer those wrong and you lose access to the temple, which means you can't fully participate in the community's most important rituals. Now, if you grew up evangelical, you probably had your own version of this, the accountability group, the purity pledge, the altar call. The mechanism varies, but the shame architecture is the same.
And so I think that shame is just this wheel, and that's just sexual shame, right? There's other ways to feel guilt in Mormonism, but sex is the biggest one. And I think it comes from the fact that the early leaders of the church used coercion, threats, sometimes physical, definitely spiritual, for generations. And that's a kind of violence. And that energy, that violence gets passed on forever and ever and ever. It just keeps recycling in this agitator of shame until it, it's given a healthy expression somewhere, and it's really not. And so I think the modern church has figured out how to almost monetize it, like it's repentance, purity culture is a system.
In the temple, in the temple system, in the temple recommend process, if you answer those questions wrong, there's an element of shame that comes out of that. So they're kind of, in order to extract kind of obedience and worthiness, it comes out of this system of constant checking, constant, inquisition. I don't know if that's a fair word, but you know what I mean? Like that's just a part of the system. It's just baked into it.
That's really powerful. Like that's a really easy way to control someone. And I think that's, we see our political landscape, for example, with rage algorithms. That's, what's keeping us hooked. We know that rage makes money. We also know from systems of power that if you can keep someone scared and angry, they're very easy to control. If you're not in your, if you're working inside and out your amygdala and you're activated, you can be controlled. You're not thinking logically. And so that's kind of what this does, is it's a data collection system. And so they build all these impossible rules around them that you will break. It's inevitable. They need you to break them, by the way. So then you can feel beholden to them. And like I said, seeing like powerful executives who have given over immense control to the church that they would never give up in their own boardroom. Right. It's because, the church has access to this very private interior part of their life, which it structurally starts from a very young age. And women are also taught to be like huge enforcers of that.
Totally.
And so, and that's not even, we're not even talking about women shame. Like women have this whole
Right.
other.
We have our own, right? Because we're not supposed to feel desire. We're not supposed to be interested in sex or pornography or anything like that. And, you know, so if you have any sort of sexual desire or interest, that can be a very shameful experience.
Or
Or,
even not even just sex, like just having needs at all as a
yeah,
woman is
yeah,
very shameful. You
right,
know, and
right,
I know I can hear LDS people being like, that's not true. We're, you know, I still find myself, all the work that I've done, I feel shame sometimes for wanting things. I feel shame for not wanting things. I feel shame for just like feeling conflicted about some of the choices I made when I was Mormon that, you know, that you live with forever. Like as I chose to have children at a young age,
right.
which is, you know, my kids, of course, are great and wonderful and I love them, but it's hard to be a mother. It's hard to be a working mother. And so whenever I run into those conflicts, you know, that shame creeps up of like,
Right.
how could you question that?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that shame is inherent in us too. Wanting anything outside of the script is shameful. And
Mm.
I see women struggle with that constantly.
Yeah, I have that. I have those similar experiences as well. I have a good friend of mine who always says, it's not about what it's about. When someone leaves a system like this, that the fight that follows is almost never about what it appears to be about. So I asked Lindsay directly, why do family relationships blow up so badly when someone's faith changes?
I think Mormon families, we need to have some compassion for their reaction because they don't even have language.
Yes.
There's no language. The language that you're being taught and the definitions for words that you're being taught are sometimes different than the rest of the world. And I think like in LDS culture, we do this, it's sort of unintentional too. It's self-reinforcing. Like when we prescribe what happiness means,
Mm.
this is happy, if happy families, and here's the definition of what that means. It doesn't account for actual families, right? Families are different and their needs are different and their situations are different and
Yeah.
circumstances affect everything.
Right.
And we need to give credit for what that means. I mean, in my own life, I've had to unpack. It's so hard for me to tell people no. If they ask me for a favor or whatever, it's so hard for me to tell people no. It's because I wasn't even given language to say no to things, right?
No, thank you.
I've
Right.
had to learn language and like I'm a grown ass woman and
Mm.
it's still taking me so much time. And that's made me completely vulnerable to like, you know, people taking advantage of me and other things. And, you know, not that I'm the complete victim in my own life, but in that way, like it's been very difficult to articulate. And I think people that have these disruptions and these changes, there isn't language. It's not part of the path. It's not part of the program. And so they can only react within the tools that they have at the time,
Right.
which is usually shame, spiritual threats,
Yeah.
character attacks, something's wrong with you, you know. And so it's usually such an ugly process. Now, I will say that I think that because leaving Mormonism is becoming so ubiquitous, at least in Utah, like we are shrinking. Anyone that knows anyone, you're seeing stakes disappear and church
Yeah.
houses being sold. Like I remember as a kid, I don't think any LDS church house that I knew wasn't belonging to the church. Now, like our local church is a mosque. Like
Oh,
it,
wow.
they're
Interesting.
selling
Yeah.
it to other people. Yeah, it's such an interesting time. So the church is shrinking. Everybody now knows people who have left the church. So I
Yeah.
think that we are culturally developing a language, at least here. It's hard because when we talk about Mormonism, it's a global church, and I can
Right.
only speak to, you know, the American West. But I do think that there's better language for it, but it's still relies on the old tools of scarcity and fear, and we're still using that frontier doctrine. Like if you leave, the whole family's destroyed. Like that's how we see salvation. You are breaking the chain, and that's really just reflecting a reality of the frontier, right? If you leave, the family suffers. If you're colonizing Cedar City, you know, in 1860.
Right.
It is so difficult to stay alive. You need the unity of everyone. So there's no time for individual expression, right?
Mm.
And again, it's such a weird thing, Mormonism, because it's coming out of, I always have to remember, Joseph Smith's parents and grandparents are Revolutionary War veterans, right? They come from this idea of fighting for their independence, and now America is embracing this individual identity. Like, we have all this democracy, and Joseph Smith does that with religion. I meet Jesus and you can too.
Right.
So they're democratizing everything and figuring out the individual. But then you come west and it's like the individual has to be erased again, and we have to work together. And if you step out of line because Katie decides she doesn't believe or doesn't want to do this anymore, all the kids die. Like, it's not, the stakes are not low.
Yeah.
So I do think that has created sort of a cultural anxiety that carries on today, that has been co-opted by shame and doctrine and all this other kind of stuff. But I will give some credit to some of that was a control mechanism of Brigham Young to control his people, but some just came naturally as an outgrowth of survival, I think.
Well, that's a very compassionate way of kind of looking at that and reframing that. I really like that, because I just like to look at it and judge it. But I think
it's that's also fair too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that exchange between us. Lindsay is offering this generous historical reading, and I'm like, yeah, I'd rather just judge it. But her point, I think, matters. The anxiety your family feels when you change isn't just about theology. It's about an inherited sense deep in the bones of the system that the group cannot survive dissent. Now that makes sense. And I think, like, it's hard because when people are leaving, their lives are so disrupted. They are finally putting words to the shame and the trauma or the anger or the hurt that they've experienced. And so you're not really, it's very difficult to be equipped in that precise moment of upheaval and pain to extend compassion to the system that you're rebelling against. But I do think it is important to kind of keep that in mind when you're going through it with your family members or whatever, that they don't have the words for it. It's kind of forcing the system to be a little less rigid. I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't excuse the bad behavior, because I've seen, the thing that breaks my heart over and over again is the church also, the culture, the system, the doctrine, the theology, the cosmology demands that you choose the church first over the family member, right? And so when we see people do that, like if, their child is gay or their child has a faith crisis or someone leaves or someone, has an experience or a tragedy, it's often like a tragedy that doesn't, sort of comport with what they were taught that the church would do for them. Anything that doesn't fit, you see people that will rely on, well, the church says this and I'm going to go with that. I'm going to disregard what you feel. I'm going to go with that. And that happens still too often. And that's disappointing. I think that's a result of an immature mind, an emotionally immature mind. And the growth that is required for character development and for wisdom and knowledge requires growth and pain and being uncomfortable and doing things that make you uncomfortable and challenge you. In Mormonism, we have an actual limiting belief that we instill constantly, which is if it makes you uncomfortable, it's from the devil. And so then you stay away from it. That is completely opposite to what it means to grow as a human being. I'm an anxious person. I have to go outside my house and talk to people and put myself in uncomfortable positions all the time for me to grow as a human being. And I think that alone, this idea that you need to shy away from things that are uncomfortable, I'm very Pema Chodron, go towards the things that scare you now.
Yeah, that's really astute. Yeah, that idea that if you feel bad about something, it's wrong necessarily, right? And sometimes it's tricky because when the church tells you what you're supposed to believe or think, or that you can trust people maybe that you can't trust, it's sort of a double-edged sword. I think about how many worthiness interviews did I sit through as a kid where they were asking me like wildly inappropriate questions that made me very uncomfortable, but I didn't think I was allowed to say, that's really none of your business, sir. And then on the other hand, if you do feel uncomfortable because someone is challenging something or inviting you to think about something in a new way, or because there is growth or
it feels like with me, my instincts, there was like someone who took a stick and just like stirred it all up. So it was so foggy. I mean,
yeah.
I had a therapist recently, like, I'll give you this good trick that she gave me. She
Right.
said, intuition is really simple. She said, I'm going to ask you some questions, Lindsay, and your only job is to answer mm-hmm or mm-mm. I was
Uh,
like, okay. So she asked me, and you guys can do this at home. Are you a woman? Mm-hmm. Are you a man? Mm-mm. And she asked me just like very simple questions. And she's like, that feeling that you have when you say, mm-hmm, that's your intuition. And it's so simple, but it gets so distorted, co-opted, and like woven into this architecture that is meant to co-opt this. So it can control you. But I think all the time, the things that would create growth within families, for example, someone leaving the system, that is such a growth edge.
mm-hmm. Or mm-mm. That's it. That's intuition.
When people are leaving the church and they're upset about their family, I'm like, congratulations, you are a growth opportunity for your whole family. Like, that's pioneer work. Like, that is on a new frontier.
That's
And
awesome.
your job is to, try to do that as compassionately as possible. And you're right, sometimes when you're in it, there is no other room for anything other than courage. Like, it's like, Tinkerbell the fairy, she only has enough room for one feeling. Usually it's jealousy or rage. When you're leaving the church, it can feel like that.
Mm,
If you can expand your room, your spiritual room, just a little bit, if you can grow too and be like, okay, I'm going to stay rooted in my values, which is I know something isn't right, something isn't fitting. I haven't quite figured out what that is yet, but I can feel it. That's my in here.
mm-hmm.
And understand that they can't feel that, they can't see that yet, but they're going to see it in me.
Yeah.
So how can I best live into those values? It's not your responsibility to be a growth edge for your family or an example or whatever. It's your responsibility to care for yourself. And it will be a messy process and you won't be perfect. Like when I left, I had my community actively shun me I was very public. So it was like a very dramatic sense of it. But I wish I would have had a little bit more space for, okay, you're being rejected. And what did you expect? Like this is the game. Yeah, this is the cost of leaving is and the cost of change is being uncomfortable.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's wise. I think the the things that I did that I'm grateful that I did on my way out were to go slowly, taking time and not necessarily leaping to a particular outcome. On the other hand, there were relationships that I was trying to hold on to that I probably needed to let go of a little sooner, right? You kind of have to discern who are the people who are able to grow with you and who aren't. And so some of those I maybe should have been a little faster to say goodbye to.
That's where boundaries come in. One of the things that I encounter all the time, I do a lot of work with, people who are leaving the church and ex-Mormons and that messy part of life. And the thing that I think that everybody needs inside and outside the church, if you're staying, you're leaving, whatever, you need boundaries. Like we have no boundaries because in Mormonism, in that village, the village boundaries are very blurry. Like you can go to all your neighbors' houses and you trust everybody. And there can be a really beautiful part of living that way, right? Like I loved that I spent my summers playing night games in and out of everyone's backyards and living rooms, and I knew all the families and, I trusted all of them. But then, I find out a bunch of boys in my neighborhood were all being sexually abused and I had no idea, right? Like there's shadow sides to that too, when you don't have boundaries and you have a lot of trust. And when you're practicing them for the first time, it's like a muscle, right? Like you're not, it's going to be pretty weak at first.
Yeah.
So I do think that there is a tendency to overcorrect sometimes. Maybe you'll be too harsh on a boundary here, too loose on a boundary here. And I would just recommend anyone who is leaving or questioning, get some guidance, get a light worker to help you on your hero's journey, pay for a really good therapist.
Yeah.
Someone who's credentialed after working with Jody Hildebrandt.
Yeah,
stuff.
do that.
Please get a really good expert.
Right.
And if they don't help you, then find someone who does. Your therapist should be kicking your ass a little bit. Like, it's not just someone who tells you why you're the victim, but why, like, how you're participating in this and how you can change your life and what things you can root out. Because my biggest frustration with people who leave the church is they leave and then they point the finger at the institution and go, it's all their fault.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, you were part of it though. Like, what was your part in it? And people hate it when I say that. And I get it. I know what impulse that brings up in me. It's like, well, I didn't choose to grow up in this. I didn't choose this and this and this. All of that is true. But if you can't recognize that you upheld that system, at least for a time, even if you didn't believe or even if you felt wrong, but you participated in it, to me, that's the medicine. Because that goes, okay, that tells me what my work is. And if I'm doing my work, then I'm responsible for all I can be responsible for.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm making the culture better by cleaning up my side of the street. And that's my hope, is there's not really any utility in being the victim of the church forever. It's an important awakening process, and it is true, and you have been victimized, and you have been controlled. All of that is true, and you need to find your resilience. And once you do, you're going to be just fine. And the part of the resilience is figuring out that sort of pioneer spirit. Okay, I'm sent out here in the wilderness. I can't survive like this. What step do I take in the right direction? And I'm going to be okay. And if you can get to that, then you'll be fine.
That's very wise. This might be the hardest thing Lindsay says in this entire conversation. Your pain is real, and you still have work to do. Both of those things. At the same time.
My biggest advice to people who are leaving is, when you have found out something that doesn't fit, whether it's you or a doctrine that you never knew about, whatever it is that is your catalyzing moment, right? That's the beginning. It's not the end. And so I remember thinking, I found out all this church history. Now I know the truth. And it was like, I know nothing. Like, that's the attitude that really served me, was a lot of curiosity. But curiosity without boundaries is very, very dangerous. I trusted everyone. And I remember, Katie, like, being so wrong about the church sort of made me feel like I don't know anything. I don't trust myself at all.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to trust whatever anyone else is giving me that sounds good. And I wish I would have had more wisdom to be discerning then, but I just didn't have the skills or the tool set. And you kind of learn that through trial and error. And I do think that we are also groomed to care so much what people think. I mean, that's a natural primal instinct anyway. But when it's fostered within a village community, like, your whole life is still dependent on it. And so you do probably take the opinions and advice of people who haven't done the work themselves, and you're weighing and giving too much weight to their opinions. And I always think about, like, are you taking advice from people who are moving in the direction you want to, or people that are stuck in the other place? And pay attention to that. And that doesn't mean you need to always get rid of them. It just means that they're not helpful for you here.
We end each episode of Faith After Faith with the same question. So I asked Lindsay, what does faith after faith look like for you?
Oh, yeah. Well, we could have a whole podcast on that. I think it's so important. I mean, I went through a period, and I would honor all your periods too, like, of your eras of doubt or disbelief or whatever. I went through a period where I didn't believe in anything. Like I said, how could I be so wrong about this?
Yeah.
Maybe nothing is true. That was an important phase, but I'm really glad that I have a belief system now. And it's crazy. It's of my own making. It's my own bricolage inside my head of mysticism and tarot and simulation theory and Mormonism and all this kind of stuff. But that's what's so beautiful. It's mine. It's my own internal magic. it's my own internal relationship with this world and my life and my body and everything that I'm living in. And I don't really do organized faith these days. I think faith and community is an important thing, but I still have a wound there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think faith is essential to the meaning-making parts of our brain. And so if you can find whatever myth you're supposed to be living in your own brain, then you should do it.
She's healed, and there's still a wound. Both things are true. If you want to hear the full unedited conversation with Lindsay, and there is a lot here that we didn't get to, you can find it at katielangston.com/podcast, where for whatever amount you feel like you can donate each month, you can gain access to full conversations and bonuses. I'm Katie Langston. Thanks for listening to Faith After Faith.